After the war, the worldwide political situation was very tense. For the first time, nuclear bombs had been set off, and tension between America and Russia grew. President Truman set up the CIA in order to gain tighter control over intelligence so that secrecy could be maintained. Not long after this, the most famous of all UFO events took place in the summer of 1947. The Roswell UFO story was so well covered up at the time, it didn't become widely known about until the early 1980s. A UFO crashed, or may have been shot down, and wreckage was recovered by the US Army. Again, alien bodies were recovered, but this time 2 were still alive. 1 died shortly after the crash, but the remaining alien survived for 2 years, during which time the US military studied it and communicated with it. The recovery of the flying saucer was reported in the local press, but once this story got back to President Truman, a major cover-up operation was ordered, led by Brigadier General Ramey. The cover story concocted was that the wreckage was merely a weather balloon. Truman then, in an effort to further cover up the UFO information, set up a group specifically for that purpose called MJ-12, or Majestic 12, consisting of 12 unelected scientists and military men, all sworn to total secrecy. The Americans proceeded to derive and back-engineer technology from the Roswell craft under the direction of General Trudeau, as described in Lieutenant Philip J. Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. Much of the technology was subsequently introduced into the commercial world. Although the public were not largely aware of the Roswell event at the time, just 2 weeks before the Roswell incident, a major sighting took place, which generated mass attention, and probably marks the start of the UFO era. Kenneth Arnold, flying his own plane, observed very bright objects travelling at tremendous speed and calculated the speed to be 1,700 miles per hour, which was unheard of at that time. He described their motion as erratic and unlike any known aircraft. A further UFO recovery operation took place in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948, where more than a dozen dead alien bodies were recovered from an almost intact UFO. Again, this event was covered up until fairly recently, after people involved in the recovery operation broke their silence and spoke about the event. In the late 1940s, a struggle within the American military took place, as some insiders wanted the public to know what they knew. In late 1947, the US Air Force set up a project to investigate flying disc cases called Project Sign under Lieutenant General Nathan F. Twining, who was a member of the secret MJ-12 group. Project Sign produced a document called An Estimate of the Situation, which stated that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the most likely explanation for the flying discs. This document reached US Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vandenberg, also an MJ-12 member, in early October 1948. Vandenberg rejected its conclusion and ordered that all copies be burned. From this point on, the cover-up has continued and still prevails to this day. In total, 3 projects ran from 1947 to 1969, which the Air Force claimed were trying to solve the UFO mystery. The leader of 2 of these teams was Dr. Allen Hynek.
J. Allen Hynek, who is arguably regarded as the grandfather of ufology in modern terms. However, in my opinion, he's a flawed character because for many, many years he was a government puppet, i.e. the US Air Force astronomer who, by his own admission, debunked the subject for many, many years when really there were very good, credible sightings going on. And it was only later, as he probably became older and more opinionated on the subject, that he began to become more vocal and say, look, there really is something going on. And then he literally wrote 2 very famous books on the subject after Blue Book had closed.
In the 1950s, people became more sceptical over what the Air Force was hiding, and none more than Donald E. Kehoe, who became a thorn in the side of officialdom with his very popular series of books on the subject.
Major Donald Kehoe, for me, is arguably the most important historical figure, and I would regard him personally as the grandfather of ufology, because the guy was had links to many senior high-ranking military officials. He was responsible for setting up NICAP, which was really the first big amateur UFO organisation. But in the context of the subject, this is not really amateur in the sense of what you may generally think. This was made up of scientists, this was made up of senior military commanders, friends that he knew from naval academies, army. He knew experts in the field, and they all came on board as part of his committee.
Major Kehoe, where do you think flying saucers are coming from?
I don't know. There is an indication that they could be using Mars as a base. I don't mean they originate there, but every time Mars has approached us in the last 10 years, there's been a noticeable increase in saucer sightings. Mm-hmm. And that's been mentioned officially. In fact, the Canadian official project, on the basis of that, set up an observation station in Canada.
You say the Canadian official? In spite of the fact that he suggests that pranksters, half-wits, and screwballs are responsible for the stories about flying saucers.
Well, I wish I could show him any time a list of about 800 witnesses, some of the big names in aviation, including up to the rank of colonel in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. They're still flying, and they're still carrying passengers. They've never been grounded. They're still guiding airliners in, the radar men are, night after night in bad weather. If they're screwballs and incompetents, why are they still on the job?
Welcome to richplanet.net. I'm Richard D. Hall, and the assistant to Donald E. Kehoe at NICAP was Richard H. Hall. In this statement, Richard H. Hall describes the NICAP organization. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena was formed in 1956, flourished through till about 1970, and declined gradually thereafter. There were three distinct eras of NICAP, the differences between which are important for historical understanding. What I call the real NICAP was headed by Major Donald E. Kehoe, starting in 1957, and I became his assistant in 1958. For approximately 12 years, NICAP was a large and very effective UFO organization. This is the NICAP that accomplished a lot against great odds. When the Negative University of Colorado Condon Committee report was released in 1968, NICAP began a downhill slide and gradually faded away after the Air Force closed down Project Blue Book in 1969. Its assets finally were purchased by the Center for UFO Studies. In 1952, UFOs were sighted over Washington, D.C., but again, the event was played down by those in the know. In both the US and the UK, groups were set up called the Robertson Panel and the Flying Saucers Working Party to investigate flying saucer cases. But as revealed in Timothy Good's latest book, these groups were actually set up to do exactly the opposite. They were there to debunk and cover up the reality. An intriguing character from this period in the world of ufology was George Adamski, who in 1952 claimed to have boarded a flying saucer and met with human-looking extraterrestrials from Venus and communicated with them telepathically. Although some have cast doubt on many of Adamski's claims, certain evidence remains. The video footage of the UFO filmed by Adamski in the presence of Madeleine Rotifer in 1965 is thought to be genuine by film experts and shows a craft changing shape. In 1954, a very significant event took place, a meeting between President Dwight Eisenhower and a race of extraterrestrials. This led to a treaty giving the American military access to alien technology in exchange for allowing the extraterrestrials to continue their covert abduction program on Earth.
Edwards Air Force Base, which was then top secret for top secret aircraft, there was a meeting arranged in February 1954. I don't know any more. I do know some things that happened as a consequence of that, but there was a meeting with Eisenhower and some top officials, including the American head of the Catholic Church, Cardinal McIntyre, I think, and a few other high-ranking people, named who they have been named in one famous letter, which I published in Alien Liaison. I think it definitely did happen. My information was that there was a follow-up arrangement to transfer technology. This was given to me by another source, and a meeting. I don't know if Eisenhower was involved at this particular meeting, but I know that some scientists went out to a certain desert location and were taken out by some CIA guys.
And it's alleged that they demonstrated that their ship could become invisible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Apparently to Eisenhower's tremendous embarrassment.
Okay.
And he said that they said they wanted to educate Earth people. They were very concerned about the nuclear build-up and everything. And Eisenhower was quite shocked by this, and he said, "I don't think we're ready for that yet." And in the end, apparently they agreed, and they said, "Well, we're not going to stop being around, you know."